Okay, good afternoon. My name is Roshni Amelia, and I'm the program producer here at Media Impact Funders. Welcome to our program, and thanks for being here. Please be sure to share who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat. MIF, in collaboration with PACE and New Public, is proud to host this vital conversation. At a time when trust in local journalism has significantly declined, accelerated by the rapid spread of disinformation through social media, funders need to recognize the urgent need for a new type of local forum. These forums hold the potential to not only foster civic engagement, but restore and strengthen our democratic values by providing reliable, trustworthy, and locally relevant information. Today, we'll explore how funders can support reinventing local forums as spaces where journalism and civic engagement can thrive. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Kristen Campbell, the Executive Director of PACE. Kristen has been a leading voice in the field of civic engagement and a great partner to MIF. And we're sad to hear that you'll be leaving PACE at the end of the year, but excited for your new adventure. Thank you for guiding us through today's discussion. Take it away, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Roshni and Vince and the entire MIF team for the opportunity to partner with you all. And thank you to everybody who's here, including our wonderful speakers who are going to help lead us through this conversation. Roshni did a great job setting things up about why we wanted to have this conversation. I want to pull out one line in particular from the invitation that you probably received to register for this event. And that line says, "We think there is one often neglected area with a lot of potential for upside for communities, for local journalism, and for American democracy, and that is the local forum." And so that is the sentence that I really want to use to animate our discussion today. And I want to explore what we mean when we say that, what leads us to that belief, and what we mean by it, what leads us to that belief, and what we hope that others might come to see and understand as the underappreciated and largely untapped potential of local forums, particularly online local forums on your work, whether that work is about civic engagement, democracy, journalism, community building, any number of issues. And by we, I mean the three brilliant gentlemen who are joining me today. We have Eli Pariser, who is co-director of an organization called New Public that is thinking and working a lot on these issues. We have Leo Suarez, who actually leads an online local forum in Raleigh, North Carolina. So he's going to be able to really give us a firsthand knowledge and peek into the power and potential here. And then we also have Daryl Holliday, who is a news strategist, an organizer, a journalist, and really a meaningful and powerful thought leader on all things journalism and engagement. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation today. Eli, I want to start with you for a couple of reasons, including co-host, co-partner privilege, since this is convened by Media Impact Funders, PACE, and New Public. Can you start by telling us what is a local forum anyway? What do we mean when we say that? What are we actually talking about here?
Sure, I'd love to get into that, but and just before I do, I just want to note, I think this is the first event with Media Impact Funders where the news about your transition, Kristen, and Vince's transition is public, and I just wanted to say how much both of you have been of enormous assistance to this community in these roles. So thank you for being great allies to lots of people, including us in the space for a very long time.
That's very kind of you, Eli. Thank you. Thank
you. So I want to start by talking about things, literally the word thing. And this is fascinating. I promise it's extremely relevant. So the word thing comes from Old German, and it originated not as a word that described an object, but as a word that meant a meeting at the crossroads at a particular time. And it was often on market day. And in, Middle Ages Germany or other parts of Europe, you would have a thing to talk about the issues in your community. And there was a person who would remember all of the rules called the law speaker, but it was really just kind of a chance to talk about what was happening, make some decisions about the community. And that word still actually carries some of that connotation in other languages. So the Icelandic parliament is called the Althing, the General Assembly, and the Swedish parliament is called the Storting, which is basically the great thing. So communities need things. They need places to gather. They need places to talk about what's going on for them. And in more recent times, things have been, the town square, the community center, maybe the local store if you're a small town in America. Newspapers have served this purpose as we've moved into sort of a more of a media era. They were the places that that people really got to connect with each other. And excuse me for a second, because I'm just gonna make sure that this beeping isn't continuing. All right. Now we're in this moment where a lot of those places are kind of dwindling. Some of the physical spaces aren't as vibrant as they used to be. The newspapers, as we all know, are facing huge business pressures, and interaction is moving to digital life. And so digital platforms are where things happen now, pun intended. And in fact, most communities in America have digital places where they connect right now. Could be a Facebook group, could be a WhatsApp group, could be Nextdoor or a listserv. So these spaces have been around for a while, but the pandemic really kind of juiced their importance. And we have some evidence about that. The Pew Research Center came out with some data demonstrating that just in the last few years, these kind of local discussion groups have become much more central in people's local information ecosystems. They're actually the third most important source of local information after TV and radio. And what I can tell you from looking into this at New Public is that there's a huge variation in how healthy they are and how welcoming they are to people from different backgrounds and inclusive they are, and how high or low the quality of the information is in them. And at their best, these are some of the few kind of places left where people actually connect across difference and build trust with each other. And at their worst, they feed into division and distrust and racism and kind of fan the flames. So in our research at New Public, the difference seems to be the quality of leadership, which is one of the reasons why we asked Leo if he would join us here. The leaders of these spaces play this incredibly important role. And our belief is that the spaces could be a lot better if we supported stewards like Leo and others with resources and best practices and better technology. So, the TLDR, and I'll stop, is that, I think if these places can get better, they become this prism through which people understand who's here in their communities and kind of what people are like in the world at large. And if they stay mixed or if people are having bad experiences, that says something really important too. There's a lot of democracy problems that are hard right now, but this is a tractable one. I think we can make things better.
Things better.
Things
Lots
better.
of things. I love that. Thanks for that history. I had no idea. And one of the things that I love about what you said is how online communities help people, for better or worse, understand where they live and who they live around. Like it's kind of a prism for sense making in some ways. For folks who might not be familiar, what do these forums look like? Like, how are they structured? What do they look like? Like, what is if we were to describe them as a tangible thing, you talked a lot about the purpose, like what do they actually look like, feel like, how do they operate? Can you bring us a little bit more into the mechanics of the thing?
Sure. So in my experience, and I'd love to hear, as someone who's a practitioner, Leo's thoughts too, when we get to him, but the there's a couple things that are happening in a local forum. So one is kind of like some very I don't want to say transactional, but asking and getting help with something. Either I've got an extra item, or I needed this item, or I need a recommendation for a plumber, or I have an event that's going on and I want to let other people know about it. So there's that kind of level. And then often there's kind of a broader level of discourse that's about the community and what the community is about, and what we care about here, and kind of like building a sense of identity in the community. My colleague Angelica, who runs research at New Public, likes to remind people that, and this is, I guess, related to the thing. Town squares were town squares because they were marketplaces first, and people would go to market day to sell their goods, and then people would get up on a soapbox because that's where all the people were, and try to sell them on whatever idea that they wanted to proselytize. So our notion of town squares as places for speech originates first in this, like, it's very useful for people for a bunch of tangible reasons. And you really see both of those things in these local fora also.
That's so interesting. When you think about forums, what are some mental models that people might have? Are we talking Nextdoor? Are we talking Facebook groups? Like,
Yeah.
what are some examples of these that people might have seen or experienced,
sure.
be aware of?
Yeah, sorry. You were asking even more tangible. And so Facebook groups are a huge part of what where people do this right now. If you imagine, like, I'm in Camden, Maine right now. There's a Camden, Maine town Facebook group, and that is the place if you're looking for a babysitter or you're trying to sell a canoe. That's the place that you go. There are a lot of people selling canoes. And So Facebook groups are a big category. Listservs in some places. Email, good old-fashioned email, is still alive and kicking in this space. Nextdoor in some places. And occasionally you'll see WhatsApp or Reddit or some other kind of platforms. But generally it's, geographically specific, and we're really focused on the kind of general purpose ones. So not like we're runners in Hoboken, but this is for everyone in Hoboken.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much for setting that context for us, Eli. Leo, I'd love to turn to you as somebody who runs one of these communities. Tell us a little bit, like, what does your community look like? How did it come to be? Can you tell us a story about your experience as a forum moderator? Help us understand what this looks like for you and what it looks like for Raleigh.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. My forum it first started, I don't want to say an accident, but it came as an extension of a side blog that I'd been running, and the commenters on that blog were they wanted more, they wanted to talk, they were meeting each other, and the platform just didn't work anymore. So I moved it over to its own site with some different software, and that's just been, successful going from there. So it's almost like an extension of, while it was kind of born from blogging, citizen journalism, maybe, it kind of creates like and I wanted to add this when Eli was talking, it's kind of like a two-way interaction with the news. Instead of posting information that this is what happened, this is what we know, this kind of gets like, the community seems to take that and add their own take, or they might add even more and say, well, they're doing this now, but I remember when they did this thing, 5 years ago, for example, and that's what that experience was like. So it's almost like there's a while clients like chat, or to a certain extent maybe a Facebook group or some other platforms, they lean a little what I would call like a short-term memory. I feel like some forums have a little longer stay. It's like a maybe not long-term memory, but like a medium-term memory, if I can say that. So it's almost like there's some interaction with it as people are kind of gravitating towards. And one story wanted to share related to that is growth is a big topic here in Raleigh. And since I tend to focus like like with more in the inner city, like the downtown area or some of the historic neighborhoods. And so change is always a big thing. Historic preservation versus new growth. It's a big divide from preservationists as well as those who want new development, more housing, helping with housing supply, tall buildings near transit. Some people sympathize with that, but how they balance that. So some people fall in the middle. And I feel like those discussions get some back and forth. It's like people want to work through it to find their own opinions on it. And I will kind of bring up other examples, show things from other cities. And it's not hard because some people tend to do it themselves. It's almost as if it's kind of people are working through what their thoughts. They want to see what other people have to say first. And it just gives more context on the issue versus the city's doing this, but then people want to know might it affect my area, because people are very local. At least here, they're very into their neighborhoods or even their street, and want to see how that applies there. And I feel like that two-way, as I said earlier, you get that kind of tactile kind of feedback on what's going on, and other people's have just been following these issues for longer, so it brings other people up to speed a little quicker. So I kind of help that. That's what I kind of nudge along, and it seems to work well, and people seem to resonate with it.
That's really interesting. I see Joy just put in the chat the concept of it being a publicly negotiated memory. And I also, part of what I hear you say is like publicly owned sense making, like publicly driven sense making. So that's really interesting. What if you had to describe to somebody what the impact of this forum is on your community and what the impact of the forum is on you, what would you tell them?
I mean, it definitely is. I think I've toyed with the idea of making it a public space. It is not like you can come in and lurk all you want. All the posts are public. You can be anonymous if you have, for whatever reason, and then all the way down to some people are using their full names. They're meeting in public. Like, we know who you are. Like, you're not hard to find, right? And everything in between. So it kind of creates I'm hoping, while there are some challenges, and that might be it for another topic, I do think it at least is an easy gateway for people to come in and get information or participate and contribute your own information to get something back from it. For me, yeah, it's a good way to for myself to ask questions. And honestly, it's community. It almost took like the single point of view that the blog was doing. Now I still use that, to do writing and offer my own opinions, but it almost gives it a platform for others to go ahead and give their points of view in a format how they would like to do it. So if they like writing, I don't know, middle of the night, well, they can do it. If they want to post pictures in some other way, you can do that. So it's a more maybe open source public space in a way. So I just feel like it's a way to kind of, instead of it's my way and others to kind of contribute and it'll go from there.
Our way. Yeah, I like that. Who, did anybody ask you to do this? I'm sure it wasn't an election, but did you decide to do this? Did you take it on? Did people ask you to? How is this supported? And is this something that you're paid to do at all?
I take donations, so it is covered. I mean, my background is in software engineering, so I had the technical skills to stand this up and maintain it going long term. No one was asked to do this. I felt like there was a small gap. And sure, there is like an active, like Reddit would be something like a larger forum for this area that exists. But I just didn't like the format. I didn't like the busyness of it. So I created one as an extension of kind of my projects. I do some volunteering in the community, so I use it as my way to maybe activate people and meet new people. And it just seems to work. So it has turned into a side project of mine. I'm trying to, I've inspired maybe some other communities to do it. Like nearby Raleigh is the city of Durham. We're kind of seen as like a metro region. Kind of got like some people interested in doing this, and I was like, we could help and be a sister city kind of set up with 2 forums, like, and go back and forth, because we're kind of one region but 2 cities, and maybe you do something well and we could learn from that and vice versa. So
That's very organic.
yeah, there's just a small, there's just a small group of people that want more than the news, I think.
Yeah.
And it's more than just the comments.
Yeah.
And some of it's like it's a lot, there's lively local politics chatter on there. And I know I've got one very active counselor who comes on there and contributes to stuff. People can at him and he will respond. We've done Ask Me Anythings with key politics related or transit planners, a couple other things. Just kind of keep it fresh and keep the conversation going, and just to get people thinking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting to think about this as a form of civic engagement. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your civic engagement. Daryl, I'd love to bring you in. You do a lot of thinking at a very high level, thinking and working and organizing around evolutions in media, particularly participatory media, this really kind of two-way community engaged journalism, really thinking about information needs. So I think you have a pretty high level view of this kind of space and ecosystem. Where would you see, how would you describe that space or ecosystem? And where would you say that these types of forums fit within that like larger landscape?
Yeah, sure thing. I'd say it's civic media, it's community media, it's participatory media. Call it what you will. I think that what it really is focused on is building and enhancing community and local problem solving, which is what I hear Leo talking about. You know, that's really what it comes down to. And I'd say it's growing. In some ways, growing within a shrinking industry, like journalism at large, local news. So maybe a bit of a Pyrrhic victory in some ways. But I tend to focus on the revival that I see happening in this particular case. My co-authors and I laid this out in the local Roadmap for Local News, which we published last year. We interviewed 50 field leaders and found that this field sees news information as a public good, believes that people should have local news information that meets their needs, and that funders should invest in the production of civic information, we call it, i.e. the kinds of high quality, verifiable information that enable people to respond to collective needs, to self-organize, right? Kind of getting back to that main point, to problem solve. And I think that landscape is largely non-corporate. I think it's largely values-based. I think there's a lot of volunteers who are undergirding it, who need the support, beyond just existing in a newsroom. It isn't driven by profits, by shareholders, which I think at times present adverse incentives that aren't aligned with, I think, some of the goals of some of these forums. I think one of the best ways to counter those incentives, though, is to bring as many people as possible into the work of creating local information. And again, that's what I hear Leo talking about. In my own neighborhood, I'm involved in several forums, and a lot of it is just getting folks involved in problem solving, but I also say just joy, just the joy of being in community with people, right? That's a whole lot of it. In terms of online forums in particular, I think a lot of kind of, I mentioned earlier, civic media, community media, a lot of different words for it. I prefer civic media, but I think really the goal is to use these forums as mechanisms of participation. So I'm thinking about Documented in New York, or City Bureau, the organization I co-founded way back, Documented Network, the whole network across the country. They all have a back-end forum, front porch forum, which I'm guessing we might talk about at some point in this conversation, because they're a wonderful model. I'd love to know too, if anyone here knows of a forum from a newsroom, and pop in the chat. I'm always looking for more examples. I think I'll kind of wrap it up. The point is that I think local journalism is evolving. You have copy editors, you have beat reporters at traditional organizations, but you also have journalists acting as facilitators and conveners and moderators and forum hosts. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing. So I think you can see some of the future of what local news could look like by looking at the intersection of local news and online forums.
I want to dive into what you started to say about evolution, because I hear you say local journalism is evolving as an industry, as a practice. I also hear Leo saying that there's something that's evolving about how people want to engage with media and information. This is a question I want to ask to all three of you, but Daryl, I want to start with you while we're here. What evolution is happening between people and their relationship with media and information? What is changing? What's evolving about their expectations, about what they view as the purpose of it, about how they consume it, about what it exists to do? Like, how would you describe the ways that both the field and the practice is changing, and the expectation of citizens or consumers is changing?
Mm-hmm. I love that question for a number of reasons. I think it, for one, lets me begin with info needs, which I think is a good place to start when thinking about local news and information. I don't think that information needs are changing. The FCC identified 8 categories of them in 2011. It's things health and welfare, education, transportation, political info, like just baseline things you need to know to be a active, engaged member of a community. I think they're still right for the most part. They might need an update. That's maybe beside the point. I think what's changing the most are products to try and meet those needs or address them, and the speed at which they're being developed. I think there are more great products out there than there are people using them, which leads me to the conclusion that we need to help people evolve their expectations of what exists, and that there are some real barriers to finding these really excellent products related to information needs. Relatedly, I think protections are weak in this area. I think government has a role to play that is not being played. I think commercial industries are defining a lot of our expectations right now through the creation of development AI, through social media. So I think we should be on the side of creating info that serves needs, helping people separate, entertainment, which we need to be happy and connected to people, from critical information, which we need to survive. And yeah, this is a deep one. I can't help but go back to commercial applications, and this not being a commercial endeavor. And so I think that colors a lot of, I think, how we think about expectations, right? Like what is the use? What are you going to do with it? And I always come back to help people self-organize and act on their problems, and we will always be in a good state.
I hear you saying something about people gravitating towards the civic purpose, and also perhaps having questions or skepticism rising about if for-profit corporate models can meet civic purposes. That's really interesting. Eli and Leo, what do you think? What evolution, if any, is happening, and what is actually underneath that? Like, what is the evolution, and what's driving the evolution?
Leo, do you I can jump in, and then or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, you're talking.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think one big evolution is just we have all, now like 30 years into the internet ish. The expectation that media is going to be a one-way kind of broadcasty thing, I think, is just not the way that people are naturally expecting to interact anymore. And there are places where that's still the expectation, but I think that's one shift is just like, hey, we can do this ourselves, is a feeling that people have that at sometimes is undermining of expert judgment and expert journalistic practice, but sometimes is like exactly what we want in a participatory democracy, right? Like we want people to feel like, hey, we can make our community ourselves. We don't want people kind of standing back and waiting for someone else, much less someone else who's also trying to serve a bunch of advertisers to do that for them. And so I think that's one of the big shifts. And then I think the other shift that's related, so there's this user need, this expectation that like, hey, we're going to get to like talk about this together. This isn't just me sitting and being told what is going on in my community, but I'm co-constructing. On the flip side, as Daryl said very eloquently, the platforms that we're accustomed to have other interests in mind besides just giving us spaces to talk. And at New Public, we have some research that's going to come out very shortly on Front Porch Forum, which Daryl mentioned, which is essentially like a beautiful existence proof of what is possible when you're building something without at every intersection prioritizing what's going to drive engagement and profit up as fast as possible. And so Front Porch Forum is it's kind of like the Vermont version of what Leo's up to, sort of the place that people in Vermont talk about stuff that's happening in their town. It's a lot like a listserv, but it's a little more product-y, and it critically, it only comes out once a day. So if you want to have a flame war, you've got to have some real like stick-to-itiveness, because you've got to have a flame war across like 8 days of flaming, and people literally it just sort of doesn't work. But that also gives them the opportunity to actually really carefully moderate what's happening there, and to do moderation that's not just like, hey, you're being a jerk, like get out of here, but like, hey, here's our community norms. Do you mind rephrasing this so that this is in line with our community norms? So people have a chance to like kind of do some restoration rather than just get kicked out. So the research that we have that my co-founder at New Public, Talia Stroud, did shows, how much healthier and more valuable to people Front Porch Forum is than Nextdoor, Facebook groups, or some other very common things that people also use in Vermont. And I think it's a really great example of, if you're building these platforms with those interests in mind, you can actually do different things for communities than if you're just trying to juice advertisers.
Yeah, that makes me think too about a report that came out last year, I think, from a group called Starts With Us, that talked about how the most partisan members of Congress get 4 times the media coverage than the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, which is, to your point, like, what incentives do people have to do what actions for what purposes? So there's definitely something about business model incentives and resourcing that I think we should unpack here. I want to open it up for group questions in just a second, but Leo, what's your take on the evolution that's happening here and what's underneath it? What are you hearing people say that they are yearning for and finding in your community that they're not getting in other places?
I mean, I think they're trying to almost translate the news to what their expectations are. And there's a lot of talk about equity, servicing different communities. But I think the news, at least locally here, doesn't have the resources to talk to everyone, and therefore, if they're creating some generic output, it's useful to not that many people, right? On one end of the spectrum, you might have someone that likes all the details. I'm a big fan of long form articles. I like the details. I like to think about it. Others just want the quick hits, and then there's people, everything in between, right? So I wonder if there's an evolution toward tailored, an article's rewritten for people's preferences. I'm just making this up. A way to, some people just want to know, how does it impact me? Let's take a budget increase, a story about we're going to raise a tax and this is how it affects, your home property, your property tax. And usually they create a generic, again, I'm gonna make this up, like, 5 cents on every $100 of valuation. So someone with a $300,000 home, it's going to go up by X amount. Well, some people might not, they're like, I don't want to do that math. Like, what does it impact me? So how do you like we kind of have that. I mean, the data is there. Some of it's publicly accessible, but are the news creating that kind of stuff? A little more data journalism. Man, that's a heavy lift. There's a lot to do there. But it's the pieces exist. So some people might want that more, they might go even more local than their city. They want to maybe even break it down to for them, I think that's what people might be reaching for, to try to understand the news and just say, like, how does that impact me? How does it impact my community? And then, there's some people still want to know how it affects the city or the region, depending on, like, it could be their job to care about, the bigger picture like that. So maybe it's just different points of view and how the news affects those communities that people are trying to figure out. And the news isn't quite, they can't talk to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing you say things about like relevance and resonance. I also wonder if there's something about tone, kind of to the point that Eli was making. Are people wanting to evolve towards things that are constructive and helpful and that they have agency over, rather than like anger and fury and the more of the like it bleeds, it leads type of media coverage? I want to open it up. Simon, I see that you have a question in the chat. Would you like to ask it live?
My pleasure. Thanks, y'all. Really great conversation. Definitely very like forward thinking in terms of this space around civic media. So like glad to be part of it. One thing I'm trying to, so in New Jersey, the Jersey Bee, the organization I run, we have this curation model where we sort of effectively try to collect all the conversations happening across digital spaces in our community and produce them in a daily newsletter. And our goal, a long-term goal, is to think about how we can build community, get them off the troublesome social media networks and into a space where they can contribute to the news in the way Leo is describing, two-way ongoing conversations where we can support and moderate. That's not Facebook, which is not necessarily inherently conducive to some of the long-term goals in terms of our social impact. But I think the challenge, and so I guess my question is about the challenge of doing audience development and audience recruitment for digital spaces where there is not dedicated content production. Is that like the successful models around this? Is there, what do those markets look like? Are there spaces where what are the ways local news is participating in those forums? Those are some of the questions that come up for me.
Who wants to take that? Rock, paper, scissors. Who wants to take that? Eli?
I'm happy to. Yeah. It's a great question. And Simon, by the way, I've been following from afar the stuff you've been doing. It's really interesting and cool. So thanks for being here. I think an interesting property of these forums is that when done right, they do have a kind of like quote unquote organically viral quality to them. Like people want to bring their friends, and there's a word of mouth aspect to it where they say like and I think a lot of that is we're sort of mixing this news question and the more like utility, like where do I go to find a plumber question. I think that's a really good thing. Like, I think those things want to live next to each other. I think that's arguably like why the form factor of a newspaper, which when you think about it, has all these weird different things that don't really belong together mashed up in one place. Like, part of that is the like where the movie listings are is helpful to have next to some places where we're having a kind of bigger discussion, because that like very tactical local information is really important, or tactical local needs being met. But there's a bunch of interesting experiments that people are doing. Steve Waldman has proposed that people sort of assign journalists to be in Front Porch and sorry, Nextdoor and Facebook groups, kind of as a way of bridging, of bringing people in, that there's sort of these ambassador roles that you could imagine that are in these forums acting as individuals, but sort of drawing toward another kind of like digital location. So those are a couple of things that come to mind for me, but I think it's a big question. And to me, I'm just sort of, I think the critical thing is like, how can these spaces solve people's needs in a compelling enough way that they tell their friends and neighbors about it?
Daryl or Leo, do either of you want to jump in on this question? Audience generation?
For me, I'm not sure I have anything good for that. I mean, right now it's all, yeah, word of mouth. I mean, you want to build like some kind of value, I think, to get people to come. And usually it's there's some aspect of insider information. Usually people gravitate towards threads that there might be a small business owner that popped on and wanted to announce something. They're trying to just get some, publicity for their endeavor. But people come in and they're like, oh, they shared it here. I want to see that, I can follow them. Maybe it's not the same word, like follow, I'm using maybe a little different thing than like a social media. But if they see that they're there, and I think if you get people who are doing things in the community, then maybe that could get some traction and build people to come back. I think for me, kind of have a divide between like the hyper users that they're like daily, and I get a sense that then it kind of tails off into the kind of once a weekers, so it's very hyper local. So if you can get more ambassadors to different areas and different subject matters, I think that would be the kind of the way. Maybe it's, yeah, call it like you have your beat, and you kind of post on there. That could get people to be like, oh, this is where I can actually interact with them, versus a website or some platform where they just say email me.
There's a really interesting question in the chat from the folks at the Public Interest News Foundation. I want to ask you if you want to unmute and ask that yourself. But Leo, you already started talking a little bit about kind of the relationship between more institutionalized journalists and journalism and community forums. But does somebody from Public Interest News Foundation want to voice your question live? And then I would love to hear Daryl's response to it.
Yeah, I would love to hear Daryl's response to that as well. Thank you, Kristen. Sorry, I didn't put my name on. I'm Jonathan Hayward. I mean, I guess, yeah, just to sort of stand back for a second, this has been a really good discussion. And actually, Leo and Eli began, I think, touching on the same issue just now. But I guess, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of excitement at social media that we were all going to be citizen journalists, and you didn't really need capital J journalists anymore. That was a dead profession. They had all these crazy old-fashioned norms of objectivity, and they were going to be thrown out the window, and truth was just going to emerge through universal participation, and it was all going to be great. And then, like, a few years later, people began to think, oh no, it's all going to be shit. This is not the future we were promised. And there was a big backlash and a big sense of, oh my God, now we need the New York Times again. And I guess what's really interesting in this space is a sense of like, what if you had both? What if you had some of the virtues of social and the participation that it enables? But I suppose my assumption is, but you still seem to need something on top of that. You need some kind of curatorial or fact checking or sifting or sense making, and whether that's old fashioned journalism, I don't know. But it feels like it's something. And I just really, love to hear, Daryl and the others, what you think that's something. Am I right? Do we need that something else? Is it old school journalism? Is it something else? Thoughts would be really appreciated.
Something new, perhaps, or something emerging, right? I do think you need both. I tend to be of the camp that I'm preparing for a future in which there are fewer journalists and that we need to bring more people into the work in order to evolve it. And we'll try and tackle the problem of money and values and like a new what a new ethics system looks like, the whole thing. But as to stop the bleeding right now, I'm preparing for a world where there are fewer professional journalists sat at professional newsrooms, and there are more people who are stepping up to some of the work of building community information networks. I think a big part of this is in framing. I was even reading your question, kind of how it was phrased, and I'm not picking on it by any means because I understand how it's phrased. But I think when you talk to a community and if you said something like, we want to fact check your claims, you're gonna get like, no, we don't actually want that. Do that with the politicians. I think it's more of we want to help answer your questions, and that's going to include some fact checking. It's going to include a good ground game. It's going to include a number of things, but more of a partnership. I think things like fact checking come across more adversarial than I think some folks might want to get engaged in without having that relationship built. Which maybe leads me to the third point here is I think the relationship building is key. A lot of the forums that I see that I feel are really exciting are local forums. They're based in a place, and you can have a really strong ground game where you're getting the word out to people who you also live with. The people who do this work, by and large, as far as I know them, they live in the communities where the work is being done. They are community members. So again, kind of a reframing. I think journalists tend to have somewhat of a adversarial take on things for good reason. We're holding power to account, right? We're the first draft of history and all of the cliche things. But what does it look like to combine those skills with community organizing, right? To really lean into one of your best assets being that you are a part of the community that you're trying to build up. And that framing, I think, looks and sounds different.
Eli or Leo, do either of you want to? Yeah, Leo, you came off mute.
Yeah, I wanted to, Daryl, you said partnership, and I think that might be, that's what I would want to jump on. And, when you see, I'm gonna like pick an example locally here where one of the politics journalists, they wrote a piece, and the quotes from like a city council meeting, I recognized all those because I just happened to be interested in some of the topics, and I watched the recording on YouTube. So if the reporter is just getting quotes off of the public discussion, you're almost like some of the things that they write about, it's all public. It's not like they didn't pull someone aside and chat with them. They didn't like email them, or they didn't, it's almost like, well, you're summing up what's already happening. So sometimes you get a feeling that like, well, I could have just watched it, or if maybe, you, or in a techie way, you could just like summarize it or, whatever. So I think what I'm trying to say is if journalists could partner and almost share a little more, I feel like there's something there. If they built something like, here's a tracker that shows campaign finances, and I know some of this stuff exists, but if it was like at a local level and say like, we built this, it's using this data, and here's how you can even like do it yourself and change the columns and create your own formulas and do whatever you want, and then iterate that. Some of the community will maybe even improve it. They'll, like, for free even. They'll be so into it that they want to go ahead and contribute a few hours of their time to take their to throw their bandwidth against some of those things, and that might even improve what their output over time. It's like the journalist could almost become some kind of moderator in a sense, and the community can then raise it up even more. And as you iterate, and some of this stuff is repeated, you know, local elections keep happening, and over time you do it better and better and better. So it's kind of a tech angle. There's kind of that partnership, and there's kind of like you curate that system so that, you know, you're giving people what they want, and then eventually I guess you serve the loudest voices. And I don't know, maybe it's applicable to others. So I don't know, I just kind of talking through that, but that could be something there.
It strikes me that the way to bring out the best of both of these practices is to not only serve the voices that are the loudest, but the ones that are providing the most value, whatever value means to the recipient or the community or the consumer. Do we have, I think we probably have time for one more question, and then I have one, and then we'll wrap up. Anybody have one more question?
I have a question.
Yeah, Shannon.
Yeah, it strikes me back to what Daryl was saying in response to Jonathan's question, that it sounds like some of the solution is like rooted in really community-driven, like mutual aid networks that you saw a lot of, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, or, you know, long-standing community organizing tools. Just wondering how, for the funders in the room, something to think about, like how traditional philanthropy and funding practices might work together to kind of, you know, move away from the traditional ad incentive business models that you see kind of corrupting some of the more traditional platforms and outlets that are there now. Like, how do we come together to build something good without it metastasizing? Some hope for the end of the discussion, maybe.
Eli.
I can jump in. Yeah. No, I think this is, I mean, I think there is a lot of reason for hope here, and a lot of opportunity for philanthropy to play a kind of catalytic role. I mean, what's exciting about this space is it's there is a massive and kind of amazing experiment underway already that is happening. And there are, you know, we're going to try to quantify how many of these spaces there already are, but there are, you know, hundreds of thousands of local experiments happening, some of which are happening in Facebook, like we talked about, but some of which are people like Leo or their Front Porch Forum. And what's interesting is that so there are all these lessons being learned and models being developed, but because these are kind of never going to be the next unicorn in Silicon Valley, we don't have we have VCs that will go and search out the next unicorn, but we don't have the apparatus totally right now to go and search out all of the amazing breakthroughs that are happening out there right now. And I think if we can lift those things up, and this is part of what New Public wants to help with, among others, you know, that can be incredibly valuable, because again, it's the solutions to a lot of these questions and problems are out there somewhere. People have figured it out. The question is, can we find it, and can we kind of share that across everything that's happening? And that seems like a really really exciting role. The other thing I'll just say is that I think increasingly we're seeing very local oriented philanthropies start to understand that when they think about a local community and a local information environment, that they need to be taking this kind of like 360-degree approach. That's not just let's prop up the existing newspaper, although that's important, but that's like let's really look at what a healthy information and community ecosystem looks like in the 21st century. I'm thinking of the Steinman Institute in Pennsylvania as one really great example of that, but there are a whole bunch of them. And I think that's a really exciting next step in the journey that I think the local news roadmap that Daryl co-wrote speaks to. But that's also like a really different way of interacting from how community foundations and other kind of local funders have typically thought about information. So I think it's like I think it's really, you know, one of the things I love about America actually is this real historic penchant for inventing new civic things. And there's a lot of things, you know, in the history that's not so great, but that piece of the history is, you know, again and again in these moments of social fracture, if it's the public library, the public park, public schools, we figured out some new things about how to do stuff together. And I feel like this is a moment for that.
We figured out some things about some things and some ways to make some things better. You have blown my mind a little bit, Eli, about the etymology of the word thing. As we move to close, Shannon's question was very close to the one that I was going to close this with. So I actually want to pull up on the question that Vince just put in the chat as the question to end us on in a rapid fire is, how do local fora interrupt or challenge polarization? Leo, I'd love to start with you on this. Can you give us some hope or some examples of how you've seen polarization and division be overcome or challenged or complicated in productive ways on your forum?
Yeah, there's certainly some topics that that get polarizing, and usually most of the time it's usually just off topic. So it's just not what, like, we're not going to discuss during the pandemic. COVID is just not a relevant topic to what we're doing, so we didn't talk about that. But businesses that had to close and their risk because of COVID, that was like, I would have considered that more on topic. So that was a pretty heated thing. I think this is more art than science. I do think moderators play a huge role here, and I'm not sure I did it right or wrong, but I did something. And so, you know, people do say some things, and then someone else comes in and wants to correct them or what they think is being corrected. And so there's kind of the art I take into is that if I don't feel like they're totally offending people and being totally abusive here, then they're going to have to own what they said, you know? And that memory that I talked to earlier kind of sticks with that user. And you'll just see that they get kind of ignored. And some of the software technology allows people to kind of filter that out, right or wrong. So I think even though it's anonymous, I think it balances this line of like, if you're going to say something, you better like own it. And there's a bit of consequence maybe with just, you know, speaking in a dumb way that, you know, you're just not going to be taken very seriously going forward on other topics. Whereas other people who come in and say more moderate things, it kind of gets more traction. And over the long term, that investment like works on your experience. So I don't know, that's my take on it.
The accountability, I
Yeah.
hear you say. We are almost at time, but I know what one of my mantras that I'm going to take from this conversation moving forward is, Leo, something that you just said that I think is important for us all to keep in mind sometimes. You said, I don't know if I did it right or I did it wrong, but I did something.
Right.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I think that's really a good call to action for us all to think about in terms of not only what we do, but how we do it in moments and times like these. So thank you for that. Thank you to all of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Roshni to wrap us up.
Thank you. So in closing, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our speakers and our moderator for sharing their valuable perspectives and expertise. And I'd also like to express gratitude to PACE and New Public. We always love working with you, so thank you for collaborating with us today. Before we part ways, I want to invite all of you to join our ongoing monthly journalism calls. These calls provide a platform platform for funders to discuss pressing issues and share best practices. It's a great way to stay connected and informed about the latest developments and opportunities. And our next call is scheduled for September 16th, and Shannon will drop a link in to register. And if you don't already know, our 2024 Journalism Funders Gathering is scheduled for October 23rd and the 24th at KQED in San Francisco. And so we really hope you all can make it. So make sure you sign up. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.